In this episode, we'll be looking at how to correctly hold your longsword. This is critical as this is literally how you are connected to your sword. If your grip is compromised, you will not have a proper control of your sword. You will not be able to maintain proper edge alignment, and in the worst case, you will lose the hold of your sword. To recap the previous episode quickly, we have a few main goals when it comes to structure. Naturally, these goals also apply to our grip. We want to have a kinetic chain all the way from the crown to the tip of our sword, and we want that kinetic chain to be as leak-free as possible. By leak-free, I mean that we don't want to lose our cutting power because our joints bend and they are not able to transfer the power efficiently. We also want to have proper control of our weapon so we are able to maintain proper edge alignment, trajectory, and follow through. Our grip is especially important when it comes to edge alignment. In the previous episode, we looked at why maximizing our reach is so important for our cutting performance. How we grip our sword plays a big part in this. Let's shortly consider about what the sources say and show about gripping the sword. The reason I'm spending time to go through this is because sources often come up when discussing cutting, especially in the sense, but in the illustrations. If you are not interested in the sources, feel free to skip to the next section of this episode. You will not be missing any actual theory. You should know that my background is in the Lichtenauer tradition of German longsword fencing. That basically means 3227A, Pseudo von Danzig, Meyer, and so on. I have read Fiore di Liberi's Fior di Battaglia, but I would not claim to have studied it. The manuscripts I am familiar with don't really say much about how to hold the sword. I presume that this is because the manuscripts assume that the reader can already fence, so they don't bother teaching something that would be considered common knowledge. From our point of view, this is of course very unfortunate. 3227A says you should hold your sword certainly and surely with both hands between the hilt and the pommel. The manuscript then continues on and says that this way he holds the sword much surer and strikes much harder and surer. The manuscript also takes some time to explain why holding the pommel is a bad idea. From this, it seems quite clear that when cutting, you should hold the sword with both hands on the grip and not hold the pommel. I recommend that everyone goes to Wiktenau and reads this bit. The link is in the description. This information can be found in the Anonymous's fencing advice section. This is the only direct text reference on how to hold a sword I'm aware of. If you know any others, please go down in the comment section and leave a link to the source. There are lots of illustrations which show all kinds of ways of gripping a sword. Not holding the pommel, holding the pommel, reversing your hands, dislocating your wrists, and so on and so on. Generally, I don't put too much trust into the illustrations in the manuscripts. Now, before you start writing angry comments, please let me explain what I mean. I do not mean that you should not trust the illustrations at all. I think that they are better than not having any at all, and they can be a very valuable tool when trying to figure out the cryptic texts we are learning from. However, there are few major issues with them. Firstly, to have any basis for learning HEMA in the first place, we actually have to assume that the writers of the texts knew what they were talking about. However, I think it is rather dangerous to make the same assumption about the illustrations. Were the illustrations done by someone who knew how to fence? Were they drawn based on a description instead of a model? Did the writer oversee the illustrations? Were they done when the manuscript was written, or are they later additions or re-illustrations of the original images? how much artistic liberations were taken, and are some parts drawn the way they are simply because that was the way of illustrating things back then? Are some parts simply drawn incorrectly? If there were models, were the models actually fencing in the specific way described in the texts, or are the illustrations just showing the specific way a single fencer did things? In many cases, we simply don't know the answer to these questions, at least not all of them. My point is, I would not recommend blindly trusting the illustrations. For example, this one. To have the exact same grip, you would have to dislocate your wrist. Even with my best efforts to recreate the grip seen here, I can say that it is extremely uncomfortable and it subjects my wrist to a high risk of injury. When having to choose between accurately replicating something in a manuscript and not injuring myself, I choose not to injure myself. In my opinion, one of the more trustworthy, though again in my opinion very artistically executed set of illustrations is in the Myers manuscript. SwordStem has a very good article on these. The link is in the description. I highly recommend that you go and read the article yourself, but the short story is that when doing or preparing to do basic long edge cuts, the illustrations mainly show not holding the pommel. When doing something else, they show both holding and not holding the pommel. Now that we have all of that out of the way, let's actually get to learning how to hold a longsword. In this section of the episode, we'll be taking a look at where and how to position your hands on the longsword and why. In the next section, we'll take a closer look at gripping the sword. By gripping, I mean how do you make sure your hands stay where you put them and the sword only moves in the ways you want it to move in. To understand why we need to hold the sword in a specific way, we first need to understand what we are trying to achieve. If you have not yet seen the Recipe for Successful Cuts episode, I highly recommend that you go and watch it right now. The link is in the description. The most important thing is that we are trying to cut. We are not trying to slice, or thrust, or control with pressure. We are trying to cut. The important distinction here is between cutting and slicing. To cut, we need to direct energy in and through the target. You can think about how you chop wood or how a butcher cuts through bones with a meat cleaver. To slice, we draw or push the edge along the surface of the target and apply pressure. You can think along the lines of cutting bread or slicing tomatoes. The Recipe for Successful Cuts episode has a more in-depth explanation of this. Again, the link is in the description. In the previous episode, we discussed how cutting performance is very dependent on how much energy we can direct to the target. As discussed, the amount of this energy is very dependent on the tip velocity, which is again dependent on our reach. Luckily for us, the way of holding this sword, which maximizes our reach, happens to be the same exact way of holding the sword, which also directs the energy in and through the target instead of along it. Lastly, we need to be able to control our sword so we are able to maintain edge alignment and trajectory. Especially edge alignment is more dependent on how we grip the sword instead of how we are holding it. However, all of these goals are shared between holding and gripping the sword. Some just rely more on the other and vice versa. Let's start with how to place the grip of the sword in the palm of your hand. As already said, we want to maximize our reach and cut instead of slice. To achieve this, we want to have what I call a handshake grip. With a handshake grip, you want to maximize the angle between your forearm and the short edge of the sword. This allows for better reach and a proper cutting hue when compared to a 90-degree grip. We don't want to go all the way to 180 degrees as we would have to sacrifice our wrist structure, grip or both without much benefit. To achieve this, hold open your hand with your fingers spread out. Now, place the grip of the sword across your palm in the following manner. The front side of the grip should be over the first joint of the index finger with the grip resting on the base of the index finger. The back side of the grip should be close to the middle of your palm. The grip should lay over the meaty part of your palm near the wrist at the pinky side of your palm. It should look something like this. When you close your hand, the meaty base of your thumb should support the grip from the back. You want to have a slight extension of the wrist to bring the forearm in line with the sword. From the side, you can see that the thumb should lightly touch your index finger and your finger joints at the front of the grip should be staggered. The base of your thumb should be in line with your wrist. You want to have both your dominant and non-dominant hand holding the sword in the same way. You do not want to just lay the grip straight across your palm. If you can see that your finger joints at the front of the grip are neatly lined side by side, the grip is not properly angled in your hand. If there is clearly less than a 180-degree angle between your forearm and the base of your thumb, you want to straighten your wrist. A proper handshake grip extends your range considerably when compared to a 90-degree grip. This follows simple trigonometry. If two sides of a triangle and the angle between them are known, the length of the third side can be calculated. In this case, the sides are our arm and the sword, and the third side being the imaginary line of our reach, that being the distance between our shoulder and the tip of the sword. This is called the cosine rule, which you can see on the screen right now. If the angle C, that is the angle between the sword and our arm, increases, then cosine C decreases. Thus, the length of the side C, or our reach, increases. As you can see, many aspects of cutting can be boiled down to basic math. A proper handshake grip will also angle the blade so that it's more optimal for cutting instead of slicing. This is what people refer to when they are speaking about leading with the tip. Again, refer to the Recipe for Successful Cuts episode for a more detailed explanation. Now that we know where we want to place the grip in our hand, let's see where we want to place our hands on the grip. I will first go through optimal hand placement on an average sized grip. After that, I'll go through some modifications you might need to do on different sized grips, especially shorter ones. Let's start with the placement of your dominant hand. If you are right-handed, your right hand is your dominant hand and your left hand is your non-dominant hand. Of course, if you are left-handed, it's vice versa. Place your dominant hand near the crossguard so that it does not touch the cross. Having your dominant hand close to the crossguard is important because of how almost all longswords are balanced. If you have your dominant hand too far back on the grip, the sword will become very unwieldy. This goes for all longswords I have handled, from exact replicas of antique longswords to rather cheap sharp swords to even synthetic longswords. There is a rather interesting segment of Peter Johnson's talk on the subject on YouTube. The link is in the description. The reason I advise you not to have your index finger touching the guard is to protect it from minor injury. Especially without gloves, your index finger will rub against the crossguard every time you move the sword around, and especially on impact. If you thrust against a resistive target and your hand slips, it is also rather easy to jam your finger against the crossguard rather violently, leaving half a centimeter to a centimeter of space between the crossguard and your index finger will simply make training that much more pain-free. Placing your non-dominant hand is very simple. Simply place it right behind your dominant hand so that your hands touch. The wrist of your dominant hand should be on the webbing between your thumb and index finger of your non-dominant hand. This will basically lock your wrists in the correct extension. Having your hands this close together allows for added structure as your hands are supporting each other. This comes especially clear when trying to stop the sword. When your hands are back to back and you have the proper extension of the wrist, it is basically impossible for the pommel to come up between your forearms. If your hands are further apart, it is easier for your wrist to rotate out of extension and allow the pommel to come up between your forearms. If your wrists are not in the slight extension properly to begin with, the same thing will happen. When the pommel pops up between your forearms, there are two possibilities. If you have a loose grip, the sword has rotated in your hands and you have lost most of your ability to control the edge alignment. If you have a tight grip, this has forced ulnar deviation of your wrists. Ulnar deviation related injuries are sadly rather common in sports. They are often caused by repetitive motion or a sudden ulnar deviation past the range of motion. In addition to the already mentioned loss of structure, having your hands further apart on a longsword grip has only negative effects on your cutting performance. At this point, I think that it is important to mention that longer grips and further apart hand position have some benefits in specific situations with a longsword or with different types of swords. Having your hands further apart makes it easier to move the point around. This can be very beneficial when winding in a bind. Also, larger two-handed swords, which have longer handles and longer blades and are usually used in continuous flowing motions, benefit from a wider hand position. At this point, it is important to note that I have basically zero experience handling large two-handed swords, as should be obvious from the footage you are seeing. However, the demonstration should make my point clear enough. All of these topics are outside the scope of this series, so back to the issue with hand positions. As explained in the previous episode, having both of your arms properly extended and having your hands centered is extremely important. If you need a reminder why either of these is a bad idea, please refer to the previous episode. If you start moving your hands apart, you will be sacrificing something without gaining anything in return. The first option is to bend your non-dominant arm from the elbow. This will create a structural weakness with many disadvantages, first of which is the pommel popping issue mentioned earlier. This makes stopping the sword with point in line more difficult. It also makes hitting the floor more likely with full descending cuts. As mentioned before, having the non-dominant hand further back along the grip makes it easier to move the point around. Naturally, this also makes it more difficult to keep the point in place. This is very detrimental for maintaining edge alignment and trajectory. Finally, having proper follow-through becomes more difficult. The second option would be to maintain proper extension. This forces you out of a proper handshake grip and forces a smaller angle between your forearm and the short edge of the sword. As explained before, this decreases your reach and makes it more likely that your cuts turn into slices. In addition to this, it will force the point up if you are trying to keep your hands centered. In a position like this, you can't actually cut through your target with an optimal cutting motion. Naturally, we don't want this. To fix this, we need to rotate further around our spine to bring our hands to our side. This allows us to cut through our target, but it reduces our reach even more. As we need to rotate further around our spine, this makes the distance we need to rotate, longer. It makes it slower to make follow-up actions, such as cuts or parries. This also leaves more of a dead area in the center when we are at the end of our rotation. This leaves, in a martial sense, us more open to attacks. As mentioned earlier, this is not that much of an issue with a larger weapon, which we also want to keep in motion, but it is an issue with a smaller weapon, such as a longsword. Now, let's see what you can do if you have a relatively short grip. Our focus here is to maintain a proper handshake grip as long as possible. The first thing you can do is to rest the palm of your non-dominant hand partially on the pommel. And when I say partially, I only mean the base of your palm. Wheel pommels and other flat pommels are best suited for this kind of a grip. When partially holding a pommel, you can place the meaty part at the pinky side of your palm on the pommel. Do not go back so much that the pinky itself comes onto the pommel. When cutting, holding the whole pommel in your palm does not give a proper grip on the sword. The next thing would be to push the dominant hand all the way to the crossguard. This allows you to bring both of your hands forwards a centimeter or so. Unfortunately, as said before, this will make your grip more uncomfortable. You should start to rotate the grip in your hand from a handshake grip towards a 90-degree grip as a last resort. This should only be necessary if you have very large hands and a short grip. The other situation would be with a sword which is basically designed to be used in one hand, but kinda has a long enough grip to just jam in a second hand if need be. With longer than average grips, there is no need to make any adjustments. Just keep your hands together near the front end of the grip, as explained earlier. With wasted grips, you want to keep all of the fingers of your dominant hand on the crossguard side of the waist. If the pommel end of the grip narrows greatly and is basically round, and the pommel is of a style which allows for proper grip, such as a wheel pommel, you might want to bring your non-dominant hand back a bit. This is one of the rare cases where the pommel actually might allow for a better control of the sword than a very narrow and round grip. Again, remember that you don't actually want to hold the whole pommel. You only want to bring your hand back enough that the meaty part at the pinky side of your palm rests on the pommel, not your fingers. Before we move to gripping the sword in addition to just, holding it, here are some examples of proper handshake grips on different swords. Now that we know how to hold a long sword, let's make sure that it stays where we want it and how we want it. In other words, how to grip a long sword. A proper grip should generally be as tight as possible without negatively affecting our cutting. In other words, we don't want to grip so hard that we lose our ability to maintain edge alignment or that we tire out our hands. Gripping as hard as you can is often called a white knuckle grip or a death grip. A death grip has a few notable disadvantages, one of them being that you tire out your arms rather quickly. As a note, the muscles you use to grip are in your forearm, not in your hand. The second issue is that most people don't have the same amount of grip strength in both of their arms. Their dominant arm is usually significantly stronger. If you just grip as hard as you can with both of your hands, your grip will be uneven. This has a tendency to cause edge alignment issues. In addition to that, if you exert maximum strength, you lose almost all of your capability for fine muscle control. And this once again tends to cause issues with edge alignment. To prevent this, you want to dial down your gripping strength to a more comfortable level, which you can maintain for a longer period of time. What this level actually is differs based on your grip strength. For most people, my recommendation would be roughly 70 to 80% of your maximum grip strength. Do note that higher your grip strength is, the better. If a specific application requires you to grip with the strength of x times 0.8, it is naturally more beneficial to have the strength of x plus 1 than just x. Basically, it means that you can use a lesser percentage of your maximum power to achieve the same results. However, do note that grip strength has diminishing returns after a certain point. What that point is, you have to test out for yourself. Pels are very good for this. If you can hit a pel as hard as you can, Without losing edge alignment or letting your wrist structure collapse, you are gripping hard enough. Gripping harder than this has negligible benefits. If you are gripping as hard as you can, and you are still not able to maintain edge alignment or your wrist structure collapses, it is recommended that you work on your grip strength. This is one of the instances where weight training can be beneficial to your cutting training. When gripping, you should aim to mostly use the bottom 3 fingers, namely the pinky, ring, and middle fingers. If you try to grip too hard with the index finger and to some extent with the middle finger, it tends to rotate the sword from a handshake grip closer to a 90-degree grip. This is simply because we want the sword to rest on our index finger. There is a bit more to gripping a sword than, well, just gripping. If you simply grip the grip, you are basically pulling it with your fingers towards your palm. In other words, there's mostly pressure in the direction of the edges. What we want to do is to prevent the sword from turning in our hands. In other words, we want to preserve the edge alignment. When gripping a sword, we are actually going to wring the grip. You can think of this as a similar motion to wringing a wet rag. You basically want to lock the tips of your fingers in place and then rotate your wrists towards each other. If you simply want to grip the sword, you place your hands in the position you want them to be in and then grip. However, because we want to do a wringing motion, we actually need to start in a different position. First, you want to hold the sword so that the tips of your fingers go further around the sword than they normally would. Bring them maybe a centimeter or so further around the grip. Now imagine that your fingertips are glued in place and they cannot move. Keep your fingertips where they are and rotate your hands until they form a proper hold on the sword's grip, as explained in the previous section. Most of the movement comes from the shoulders and the elbows. The only movement from your wrist should be the slight extension to bring the forearms in line with the sword. You should immediately feel that you are putting a lot more pressure on the grip. Instead of just using your fingers to pull the sword in the direction of the edges towards your palm, you are also using your palm to push the sword in the direction of the flats towards your fingers. This allows us to have much more pressure on all sides of the grip. When you want to loosen your grip, simply let your wrists rotate away from each other. This makes it relatively easy to tighten and loosen your grip. You should practice the motion until it feels natural. As mentioned earlier, an uneven grip can cause issues with the edge alignment. This is especially true with a wringing motion. You should make sure that you are applying equal rotation and pressure with both of your hands. Otherwise, you are very likely to run into edge alignment issues. After all, you are effectively trying to rotate the sword in 2 different directions. If one rotation is stronger, the sword will rotate and the edge alignment will change. This might not be apparent when only holding the sword. It might only manifest on impact. Once again, pels are great for testing your grip. Do note that a single soaked tatami mat is not that tough of a target, so it does not require that tight of a grip. There will be more about testing structure and grip in the upcoming episodes. Now that we understand the basics of gripping, let's consider our wrists for a moment. In the previous episode, we discussed about locking out our elbow. It simply means that we want to have pre-tension on the muscles to stabilize the joint. Pre-tension works because muscles are a lot stronger when they are not contracting. You simply want to contract your forearm muscles so you can prevent ulnar and radial deviation and flexion and extension of the wrist. Luckily for us, a lot of this can be achieved simply by gripping tightly. Once again, this will prevent us from leaking energy from the wrist joint and also prevent wrist injuries. As mentioned earlier, wrist-related injuries are sadly rather common in sports, especially in martial arts. As far as I know, the most cutting-specific wrist injuries would be caused by repetitive motions of the wrist, in this case ulnar and radial deviation, or by a sudden forceful movement of the wrist past its range of motion. By stabilizing our wrists, we can minimize the amount of movement of the wrist and thus minimize the risk of injury. Now that you know how to grip, let's discuss when to grip. The minimum requirement is to have a proper grip whenever your sword is making contact with something. That can be cutting or thrusting a target or parrying an attack. However, this is a rather simple way of looking at gripping. The whole concept of a good grip is to stabilize your wrist and make sure the sword does not move in your hands. By this definition alone, it should be clear that making transitions when gripping properly is difficult. Transitions simply mean the movements you make between actions, such as transitioning from a descending cut to an ascending cut, or transitioning from a point-in-line guard to a cutting guard, or transitioning from a guard to a parrying motion. These transitions, if not strictly required, greatly benefit from loosening your grip. It allows for better mobility of the wrist and changing how you hold the sword. It might not be immediately clear from the example videos, but you can most definitely feel the difference if you try to transition with a tight grip. There is also the martial aspect of using a sword. A proper grip will bring the point in line, which also means that the cross is in a position where it can actually protect your hands. Naturally, we want this to happen before we bring our hands too much forwards, or we risk getting our fingers cut off. We should also consider that tightly gripping our sword will tire out our arms. Thus, we would like to keep that time to a minimum. With these points in mind, we can lay out rather simple rules when to grip. Or, in my opinion, it is usually easier to explain when not to grip. You do not want to grip when you are standing in a guard. There is simply no benefit in doing so. You also do not want to grip tightly when doing a transition. This is after a cut and before the next one, or in general, between two actions. Any other time, you should have a proper tight grip on your sword. When cutting from a guard, I recommend that you tighten your grip before you start the cutting motion. This makes sure that whatever happens, such as a counter-attack or a parry to your sword, you already have a proper grip. This also means that the crossguard is in a position where it can do its job. From a martial perspective, the only negative thing in this is that it can be a tell which your opponent can read. If they see you tightening your grip, they can presume an attack is coming. This can be negated by tightening your grip as soon as you start the cutting motion. This removes the tell, but it makes it more likely that you mess up your edge alignment. When training, we will be doing both variations, as the martial aspect of cutting is very important. The same goes for parrying motions. You should tighten your grip as soon as you have maneuvered your sword so that it is properly aligned. For example, if you are in a low point in line guard and need to parry a horizontal cut to your ear. One way to do this is to turn the point up and long edge towards the incoming attack. At this point, you no longer need to turn your sword or move your wrist around, so you should start gripping properly to be ready to impact with the incoming attack. After a cut, you should loosen your grip as soon as you have stopped your sword, if there is no need for other actions. If you need to do another action, such as another cut, going for a parry, or transitioning to a new guard, you should loosen your grip as soon as the cut is completely done and immediately start transitioning. Transitions are a complex topic and there will be an entire episode dedicated for them. Another point I'm going to touch here is trying to add speed to the cut by gripping at the moment of impact or just before it. The idea behind this is that if you are rotating around your spine with proper extension, as you should be, you can add even more speed to the cut by initiating your grip and adding the rotation around your wrist to the motion. Basically, rotation around spine plus rotation around wrist is faster than just rotation around spine. Rotations add up, your tip speed increases, and you cut better. Sadly, this is not the case. The first issue is that to have additional speed from two simultaneous rotations, you have to be doing both of those rotations during impact. Or in other words, your sword must be rotating around your wrist while it is going in and through the target. I have already explained why you need a proper grip and a properly stabilized wrist in depth in this and the previous episode. So simply rotating your wrist or rotating the sword in your hand is not a good thing from a stability point of view. After all, no matter how fast your sword is moving, it does not matter if you do not have a proper edge alignment. Secondly, this would be extremely difficult to time, especially against a moving target. The second idea would be to grip or rotate the wrist just before hitting your target. Now you would have a proper grip and structure while going in and through your target. This, however, loses the additional speed from the second rotation, as there is no second rotation while your sword is in contact with the target. With this in mind, you should simply achieve a proper grip and stabilized wrist as soon in the cut as possible. Once again, SwordStem has a great article on this, so I highly recommend you go and read it. The link is in the description. As this subject takes time to go through, I've decided to cut this episode into two halves. This was the first one. We'll be starting the next half with a gripping exercise, and then we'll take a look at specialty grips. I will also shortly comment on push and pull cuts and gripping. Remember to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. Also click the bell icon so you get notified when the next part of this episode comes online. See you in the next half.